Broadcasting from Salisbury University campus, this is WSDL Ocean City, NPR News Talk 90.7. Putting Delmarva first. Stay tuned for Delmarva Today with your host, Don Rush.
June 12th is the date set for a historic summit between President Donald Trump and the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. But will it happen? Welcome to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush. With Singapore as a site for the historic meeting, this week North Korea may have upended the president's plans. North Korea threatened to nix the summit plans, calling off a meeting with the South Korean leaders as the joint U.S.-South Korean military exercises get underway. In addition, word came from North Korean officials that they are opposed to demands that their country get rid of nuclear weapons unilaterally. At our studio this morning to take a look at where we are as the summit date approaches, Taehan Nam. He's the Associate Professor with Political Science Department here at Salisbury University. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
So what do you make of this latest flurry of activity here with everything seemed to be going smoothly, lots of praise from Donald Trump for Kim, and then suddenly we get this hiccup. What do you make of it?
It's funny that this hiccup happened because just a couple of days ago I gave a lecture. In that, I gave really optimistic, but even though I emphasized the very cautious, optimistic view on what would happen, but I was not really surprised by today's development, given what we went through over the last, let's just say, 60 years, right? There have been up and downs repeatedly, and so I was not really surprised, and if you think about what North Korea really wants, what they have, compare that to the demand made by some of the officials, not all of them, in the White House, there's a big gap. So it is, I think, only natural, like any other negotiations, that North Korea will demonstrate, will show their hands, right? Show what they have, what they can do to, come to some sort of more agreeable consensus. I think that's sort of only natural to expect to see things like this. Probably more, very likely, right? Well, possibly more, I should say. Given the high stake and pressure that these countries, especially North Korea, is feeling at this moment.
Let me ask you this: in terms of the uproar, the first initial statements by North Korea seem to be directed at the joint military exercises, things that had been planned for a long time. Certainly, the administration did not expect any kind of pushback. And then they canceled, of course, the North Koreans, their meetings with the South Koreans. How much, just going that far, how much was that a reaction to the military exercises, or do you think the military exercises were just simply a way to, say, threaten the summit? I mean, what do you make of that particular element?
I think it's a more closer to the latter. In other words, the joint military exercise didn't really play maybe a little role, but virtually nothing, because they just canceled the meeting, the high-ranking official meeting between North Korea and South Korea. But they made a proposal of the meeting about 15 hours before they canceled it. Before they cancel the meeting, when they made a proposal, the military exercise was already underway. So it doesn't really add up to say that we are canceling it because we didn't like the military exercise. If that was if it was the case, why would you make a proposal to begin with, only to cancel it? So it is illogical. And of course, if you think about the previous comments made by Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea, he recognized the necessity of U.S. troops' presence in South Korea. And of course, this is the annual exercise. And so I don't really think that was the case.
You think it was more of a pretext?
Even less than that. Right?
Even less
It's a lame excuse, I should say.
So the number of the issue seems to be, and I alluded in the introduction, is the elimination of the nuclear arsenal in North Korea. Is there some misunderstanding here going on in terms of what the United States expects, or is this an issue of timing in terms of whether or not they decide to get rid of their nuclear arsenal?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think we do really have a high expectation, especially if you listen to our new security advisor, John Bolton. He really does have a sort of mention, right? Not only nuclear weapon, but also biochemical weapons of North Korea and its entire missile system as a sort of item to be discussed. I'm not so sure Kim Jong-un, when he talked about denuclearization, he had all that items that John Bolton mentioned in his mind. Probably not, I would think. So when they were, even though they are using the same word, denuclearization, it may mean one thing for one, but it may mean another for the other. So there is that issue. And also, even though we can sort of narrow the gap of the definitions to very possibly different definitions, we are not really clear about that yet. It is also a little bit of a timing issue because for North Koreans and North Korean leadership, is really crucial to maintain some sort of a bargaining chip. In this case, of course, nuclear weapon. So to give up the nuclear weapon, they have to have a lot and really concrete. Of course, we are demanding that North Korea take a path that is irreversible, right? Verifiable. But I think we should expect to hear same thing from North Korea. They will demand, right? Okay, if we want to take the step, you should take the similar steps that you cannot back away from it. So to achieve that, they have to act, and we have to take our action and then all those actions and should be verified by either side. How do we do that? Well, I don't think it is really easy to do it all that on either side at once. But of course, that's some people demands here in Washington D.C. Can we do that at once? All that, recognizing North Korea and building, putting the embassy, get that thing passed by House and Senate, and
Right.
Well, as we know, a little bit about the Congress, how it works. I'm not so sure all those steps that can be done as quickly, well, at once, let alone at once, quickly as North Koreans' satisfaction. So if you think about all those issues, practical issues, I think it's crucial for us to have a really realistic understanding of timeline.
Let me ask you this, because it seems to me that one of the big differences is that John Bolton, as you pointed out, basically says, we've been down this road before. You have to eliminate the nuclear arsenal, and then we're going to lift the sanctions, right? Now, from the North Korean standpoint, is that they don't want to eliminate their nuclear weapons until they get a lifting of sanctions, for example. So it seems as if, and I think it was a statement from the North Koreans through the Chinese news agency saying that they wanted something that was synchronous, whatever that may mean. Is there a way to have both those sides come to some kind of agreement, some process by which you would get the ability of the North Koreans, if they so desire anyway, to eliminate those weapons at some gradual case, or that would be acceptable to the United States? I mean, are they just simply at odds? I mean, it seems to me that's, one wants it, we want them out before we give you aid, and the other one says, no, we want the aid before we get rid of our nuclear arsenal.
It is really a practical matter, right? And it is what we have to negotiate. And I think the road is there. And for example, already North Korea is preparing to shut down their nuclear testing site.
Right.
which means that they are pretty much giving up the future nuclear weapons. So the issue is current nuclear weapons that they have. Is it really going to be easy? I don't think so. John Bolton talked about Libyan model, but the Libyan didn't really have a whole lot of weapon per se, and the facilities they had was really tiny, small, and some of them they didn't even open the box, if you will. So our job was really easy, right? Just have to bring that package and then brought back to here in the United States. But that is not the case. But can it be done? Yes, I think it can be done. Given the fact that unlike Libya, where Gaddafi is struggling to maintain power, Kim Jong-un has a total control. So if we can talk really sense to him, if we can satisfy his anxiety and needs, it is certainly doable. And he showed a sign of a willingness to compromise. I mean, if we listen to review the agreements that were signed by both North Korean and South Korean leader, he clearly stated that the denuclearization is his goal, and he even mentioned that that has been the goal of his father, a former dictator, right? But here we also have to be careful, because when the North Korean leaders pointed out denuclearization, they were talking about denuclearizing entire Korean peninsula, including South Korea. In 2003, from 2003 and 2009, there was just like a second chance when we talked about the denuclearizing Korean peninsula, is known as a six-party talks initiative. One big hiccup, impediment of the, and of course eventually the collapse. Major problem was the verification. North Korea they said they will accept the inspection team. In return, they want to send inspectors to South Korea to make sure South Korea doesn't have nuclear weapons that was deployed by the United States but known to be removed early 1990s. And if you think about the panics that we had, right, in our society when we heard the news that North Korea come up with a nuclear weapon, well, of course, they've been living in the panic for the last half century, right? I mean, let's just switch aside. Well, for the record, by the way, I'm from South Korea, not from North Korea. But if you are in the north, you're surrounded by the southern border is filled with much well-funded South Korean army. And then, of course, this well-funded South Korean army is backed by U.S. forces in South Korea. And, of course, these U.S. forces in South Korea is backed by forces in Guam and Japan. So it's overwhelming force they are confronting. So if you have panic, if you're worried, their worry should be, I don't know, multiplied by like a gigantic number for many years. So I think for have a successful negotiation and come to an agreement that we desire, first thing that we have to do is, of course, well, one of the most important things, I think, is to understand their perspective and to try to understand where they come from. And clearly where they come from is the scar of a war of 1950 and 1953.
Let me ask you about that, because it seems to me, we've had this long period of time, certainly a period of time in which the North Koreans did not have a nuclear arsenal. The United States, South Korea, they've been sitting there. They haven't crossed the DMZ. What makes the leadership now, as opposed to people in terms of the leadership, be that concerned with the idea, or think that there's an idea that the United States or other countries might actually try to invade them or topple them? I mean, is that what makes them think that?
In North Korea, you mean?
Yeah, North Korea. I mean, I mean, because I mean, all the Kims were supposed to have some kind of like sense about the world and how it worked. I mean, they have access to things that certainly the average North Korean doesn't, and yet they seem to have this fears, as you indicate.
The popular answer to that is propaganda made by the government. If you go to North Korea, you will encounter daily reminder of what happened during the war, which was really tragic, especially for North Koreans. And what we did, according to their view, to threaten their country, including all those annual military exercises with the South Korean troops. So it's a propaganda, but that's they're brainwashed, for example. But
do you think that the leadership itself has basically absorbed this in their own sense of the world? I mean, that they repeated it so often that
well, my sense is that the propaganda, any propaganda for that matter, works only when there are some truth to it. Otherwise, people will not believe it, and it will be really, really hard to have people believe it for, let's just say, 50 years. Again, if we turn the table, we believe there is a threat coming from North Korea. I really don't think so. But it's widely shared. Are we brainwashed? I don't know. But we believe that, even though logically speaking, it's far from being correct and valid. So if we think that there is a threat coming from North Korea, and if you just ponder the possibility that that idea, that sense of insecurity is maybe not true, well, again, let's go to North Korea. We shouldn't be really surprised. Again, when you hear from the when we see North Koreans express their concerns and hatred, because, well, again, as I said, the overwhelming force we have in South Korea, in and of itself, the presence of our forces in East Asia, in and of itself, is a threat enough to North Koreans who have this really painful collective memories of a war. And of course, now on top of that, right, there are many, many elements, including state propaganda. So I would say the North Koreans do have that sense, and of course that justifies North Korean dictatorship as long as they have.
Let me ask you this. So it seemed as if Donald Trump got into the presidency, there was an exchange of barbs at one point, the president calling Kim a rocket man and so on. And then all of a sudden, the Olympics come along, and there's this dramatic change, it would seem, in the attitude or the view of the North Koreans. They want to sit down, they want to talk. Obviously, Donald Trump took probably the extraordinary action of going ahead and saying, yeah, I'll meet with you, which is something that I cannot imagine, for instance, President Clinton, for instance, taking him up on. What do you ascribe that change to? Is it just simply that they, I mean, even if you finish your nuclear weapons, then now you're going to, dismantle them? I mean, what is there some internal dynamic going on here inside North Korea, do you think?
When last year or so, I wrote a piece for Korean newspaper that eventually soon United States will not, Washington D.C. will have no choice but to talk to North Korea now. And why did I make that comment? And I think a lot of people were right when they said, including myself. So people ask what changed. Well, what changed is there's only one thing. North Korea now have weapons that can actually kill, even though the possibility is really, really small, kill people here in the United States, here in the continent. Until very recently, last year, for that matter, until they successfully launched the ICBM. They can reach eastern shore, eastern coast, and then
Coast,
and then minimize the nuclear warhead small enough to put it in that rocket. The threat always aimed at South Koreans. For Washington D.C., therefore, they didn't really have a really strong enough of incentive to talk to, listen to North Korean and their demand. Of course, it's annoyance. It's something important, I guess, from our strategic perspective. But strategic perspective on the East Asia, what will happen to Japan? What will happen to Guam? What will happen? How can we deal with China? What will have an impact on that sort of power balance in East Asia? But with the technological development of North Korea demonstrated last year, everything changed. Now they can threaten us here. Now we really have to care. We really have to listen. We really have to resolve this issue. And now that need became really, really urgent. And I think that's the biggest change and most significant change in the whole picture of North Korea. So I think this time will be really, really different, and it should be different.
Because I'm just wondering whether or not, initially, certainly within the first year, the Trump administration obviously had all this antagonism. But I was just curious about within North Korea itself and its leadership, and with his new leader, because Kim's still relatively new, is there some dynamic inside the North Korean government that decided that in which he decided that, okay, this was the moment he was going to change routes in terms of Kim? Or can we know?
I think we can have a reasonably good guess. Anything about North Korea is a guess, right?
Right, exactly.
Here is some of the reasons why I have believe that Kim Jong-un could be different. First of all, Kim Jong-un is different from his father and his grandfather. Kim Jong-un was educated in Switzerland, right? He's known to be really, known to like basketball, right? He invited NBA stars. Dennis Rodman, I don't know how many of us remember that name, but so he has that background. And he mentioned that openly that he want to change North Korea, make people richer. And I believe it was last year, he actually apologized to the people. He in the broadcast, it was broadcasted. He lowered his head. He said sorry for these economic troubles, and the party will make sure that people will live in a more prosperity. And he could, I guess, dictator did say that in the party meeting or in a behind the door, but they don't say it in front of the public, right? And recognizing the fallibility of dictator is a big issue. I mean, if you remember when Stalin died, that was an issue, right? Can Stalin make a mistake? And eventually they recognize, well, or Mao Zedong for them.
Right.
But now we have Kim Jong-un, young, but nevertheless brave enough to recognize his mistake. Now, until last year, North Korea has this policy called, roughly translated, double push, right? They wanted to make the country militarily strong, but also make the country economy stronger. And they publicly declared that, and they were pursuing that policy for many years. And last year, when they completed, according to their expression, their nuclear weapon, they sort of declared that, well, now the job is done. Now, among those two push, one is done, right? So what is left? Economic prosperity. So I think they're just moving as they said long time ago. I think, again, I could be wrong, but here we have a tendency that we always sort of scrutinize North Koreans much more so than we do, say, other countries, any other countries for that matter, for good reasons, for bad reasons. But if we really look back the whole history, North Korea actually has been quite consistent. They did bad things, right? They started a war, for example. They made bad policy choices in early 1990s, leading to a mass famine. But nevertheless, they have been very consistent. Kim Jong-un, I think, said it, and I think he's doing what he said that he will do, which is making the country strong enough to defend from foreign enemy. Well, of course, South Korean troops and United States.
Let me ask you this. In terms of the economy, some people talk about investment as opposed to, say, aid, which is something quite different. And it's hard for me to imagine corporations investing in North Korea, not in down the road upending the kind of insularity that we see in North Korea, and that it could very well lead to an instability of some kind within the country itself, because when you get these kind of economic changes that occur, not only does the economic change occur, but then you get the flood of these other ideas that come flooding in. The Chinese have been able to sort of manage that over a period of time, moving from Mao Zedong to this capitalist sort of society. How confident do you think would you be that North Koreans could make that same kind of transition? I mean, to leave that control off of the country, because capital is going to be very upending.
Totally. I think that's the reason why Kim Jong-un visited China and visited one of the factories to see, on one hand, to see the development that China has achieved. On the other hand, of course, how Chinese Communist Party have handled. But I heard that North Korea is also looking at Vietnam, because Vietnam is more or less on the similar path, but not same as Chinese model, because China, as we know, now have a huge private sector, and as long as you don't criticize Chinese Communist Party, you can live like any other developed country, right? Western European country. I think Vietnam and their party, Communist Party of Vietnam, and the government has a much stronger presence in the market. They have a more tighter control. There are signs, there have been signs that North Korea is toying with this Vietnamese version, where control remain more in the hands of the government than, say, in China. And do I think that is possible? Of course. Going back to China, we have seen this model of success. And let's not also forget that I think we have a sort of really monolithic view on North Korea, that everybody is hungry, everybody is poor, everybody is happy, everybody is just brainwashed. But certainly that is not the case. If you go to, for example, Pyongyang, there are a lot of activities, there are a lot of ideas, and from various sources, we have confirmed that North Koreans have enjoyed South Korean TV dramas and pop musics, and so they know what is going on. If they don't know really, they have some sense. They've been watching all this bright, skyscrapers of Seoul in all over South Korea. They know South Koreans live better lives. Well, let me put it that way. They are richer. They know that South Koreans are richer, but they think South Koreans are corrupted. South Koreans are puppets of a U.S. imperialist. So you are right. It is pending. So it's possible that North Korea will face this sort of powerful thrive of capitalism and inevitably lose the control over it. But I think they may able to manage long enough to survive politically.
Let me just finally turn to where we are right now. How optimistic are you that that some Summit A will come about and that some kind of deal will be struck between the North Koreans and the United States?
I am still cautiously optimistic. As I said, as I believed that we have not a lot of choice left to talk to them because now they have a nuclear weapon and war is not an option. I know there have been a lot of people talking about war, this and that, and say this and that. And I think some believe actually that war is possible, even limited war or large-scale war. I don't think so. For many reasons, one of which is, well, if we were the option, we would have used it a long time ago. The reason why we haven't invaded North Korea, well, because there is a reason, good reasons, right? So I think the negotiation is the only option. Can it be done by Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un in June? That's the question. It's the question of when, not will it or if, right? So I think it will be done, and I think given Donald Trump's reaction to what has happened, I think he's really willing, capable of talking and forging some sort of agreement. When he agreed to meet North Korean leader, the invitation sort of message was delivered by South Korean officials in the White House. And upon the hearing, Trump said yes, despite the fact that his advisors sitting in that Oval Office said, oh, no, right? He just overruled that, all those opposition. So the willingness is there. I think certainly we have seen the willingness on the North Korean side as well. So this is a really hopeful time compared to any other occasions that we have seen so far.
We've been speaking with Taehan Nam. He's Associate Professor with Political Science Department here at Salisbury University about the developing situation with North Korea. We'll see whether or not the summit comes off or not. Appreciate you taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you for having me.
This has been Delmarva Today. I'm Don Rush. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for watching Delmarva Today, a production of Delmarva Public Radio. Production and audio engineering by Chris Rank. Hosted by Don Rush. For podcasts, visit delmarvapublicradio.net or subscribe to the Delmarva Today podcast on iTunes. Delmarva Today can now be seen on Pack 14.